Hello and welcome to the Convo presented by Leadership Indianapolis. I'm Ebony Chappelle, Manager of Programs and Communications, and today I am talking with Mr. Darryl Lockett of the Kennedy King Memorial Initiative. Hi, Darryl. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having us and convening this conversation to talk about much needed and critical topics in society.
Awesome. And thank you so much for making yourself available. You and I share something in common in the fact that we both started new jobs this year. You coming back home to Indianapolis to lead at KKMI. So before we jump into the rest of our conversation, tell us a little bit about what really inspired you to come back and what it's been like leading such an important organization during this interesting time that we're currently in.
Definitely. So I left here after graduating high school. I graduated from North Central High School in Indianapolis, and I was one of what I think Governor O'Bannon called at the time, part of the brain drain. A kid who grew up in the city, a son of the city, went to, public schools, and when it was time to leave, I left and said I wasn't coming back. And I actually spent 19 years away from Indianapolis and would come back just for, family and different events. But at that time where I was in my life, I don't think I could truly appreciate all that Indianapolis had to offer. We give it the moniker of Naptown or this sort of slow-paced city. But once you get some of that out of your system and once you realize that Indianapolis has everything you need and provides it in a package that puts a focus on family, puts a focus on community, the city becomes all the more attractive to me. So, my wife and I, when we were thinking about where we wanted to relocate after, just different transitions, both professionally, educationally, my wife had just finished her PhD. We thought, some of the big cities, and, we had lived in Washington, D.C. for some time. We'd lived in Philadelphia. And then we said, let's look to Indianapolis. And I think I'll add HGTV had a lot to do with it. The affordability.
Wow, so good bones.
Good bones. Yeah, I got to give me a T-shirt one of these days. And you said coming back to KKMI, it was, just sort of a wonderful alignment of just a lot of different factors and forces that brought me to KKMI. They were in a national search, and I was looking to, find a meaningful way to come back to my hometown and make a difference in the community that means so much to me. And, the mission aligned. I don't know too many people who don't agree with their mission to eliminate division and injustice. Very, very beautiful and very, very broad. But it was something that was a challenge for me, both professionally as well. I had actually pivoted in my career. I spent probably about the first 10 years in politics, doing political consulting and strategy, operative work. And then moved into philanthropy, spending about 5 years at AARP Foundation in Washington. So I was looking to come back, and this presented a wonderful avenue and vehicle to truly make a difference with one of what I say is one of the best boards in the Indianapolis community-based organization, nonprofit sector. And, where our diversity is our strength, and we're really seeking to make a difference in the lives of folks in Indianapolis and strengthen the community.
And thank you so much for sharing that, and welcome back home, even though I know you've been here all year, but welcome back officially, I guess. When I first came to know who you were was through the Indy Day of Solidarity. So that whole program was so very powerful, and it was a very impactful conversation that was had. I loved the things that you and Angela Kane talked about. And now that we've had some time, a little bit of distance in between that, I want to know your thoughts on it as a leader. How do we continue to have those important conversations moving forward in a very intentional way? Because, it's easy, I think, to get caught up in the moment. And then when the moment has kind of passed and people start to get back to normal, to, maybe not pay so much attention to it anymore. But how do we keep that going?
So I definitely think it's going to start with listening and understanding. And I will say that I first want to add the empathy that we've seen at this time, not just in Indianapolis, but across the country, to the plight of the historically disadvantaged and historically under-resourced communities and individuals is just unprecedented. I'm inspired, and I just love seeing on the news protests that are sparking all around the country, because that's people who are actively putting aside the culture of benign neglect that so many of us have lived with, where we can turn a blind eye and say that, that's not my issue, that's not my problem. Dr. King says what affects one in a major way affects us all in a minor way. So now we're seeing that we are interconnected and interrelated in a way that we have certain codependencies with one another. So I think, coming to it with this lens, this Indy Day of Solidarity was just a beautiful, statement and stance from the community. And it goes without saying that the corporate community stepped up in a way that we have never seen them at all. In that one event, there was a commitment of over $75 million towards issues of social justice and racial justice, and addressing some of those inequities and inequalities that have existed in our community for generations. But to have this conversation and to keep this conversation going, we need to center it on the pain, center it on the frustration, center it on the agony that individuals are feeling in their daily lives. We see that, forces come together to provide redress to the corporate community. What happened downtown was unfortunate. And we saw committees and we saw, entities and organizations commit funds to rebuild downtown. But we must keep that same energy to rebuild the lives of folks who have lived in inequitable environments for years, lives of folks who have, sent kids and grandkids to schools that they knew deep in their heart weren't on the same level or the same status as schools on the other side of town. We need to keep that same energy to hear the lived experiences of these individuals, to understand their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, to understand the structural barriers, the challenges that are in place, that some, are deliberate and intentionally designed, and others have just happened, by sheer, phenomenon and forces beyond the control of any one individual, to then provide, some undoing to what has served as a roadblock or a hindrance to their progress and their advancement in Indianapolis. So I think having those conversations, making yourself vulnerable, acknowledging that, what you see and what you experience may not be the reality for someone else. We often hear, the statement of pulling oneself up by their bootstraps. What about the person who doesn't have boots?
Yeah.
Some people don't have boots, and realizing that there's an element of privilege. And when your privilege intersects with someone else's oppression, you really have to check and look internally as to what you can do. Bringing your hands to the table, bringing your heart to the table, and bringing your and bringing your head to the table to ultimately bring about some change.
I think that for leaders, sometimes it can be very overwhelming when you're in a position to try to figure this out, because you're like, okay, which way do I go? What do I focus on first? From your perspective as a leader, what are some of the key priorities that you think people should be focusing their energy on right now?
So, and I tip my hat. He's one of my mentors. He's a leader in the field of philanthropy, Darren Walker at the Ford Foundation out of New York. At the end of 2015, he wrote a letter to the sector, to the philanthropic community, and said, we have to move from this message of equality to a message of equity. And I think now with, the social and social justice cries that we're hearing across the country, coupled with the pandemic that we're all living under and experiencing, we are able to see some of the inequities that exist and have existed in communities for generations and years. We talk about the digital divide within education as kids are trying to go online and have virtual education. Yeah. Giving a laptop computer to each student is wonderful. But we also have to realize that many of these kids are taking that laptop computer home to environments that don't have stable internet. So just, treating everyone equally and giving everyone an equal chance with an equal computer may not address some of the shortcomings and challenges that people are even coming to the table with. And I think we as leaders need to, sort of update our narrative, update our message points to move from that message of equality and move to a message truly of equity. So that we're, in the business community, we talk about human-centered design. But how do we move from human-centered design to equity-centered design? We see new developments going on all across the city. And don't get me wrong, I'm happy to see, places that, were referred to as Dodge City 20 years ago when I left, now flourishing, with new homes, new restaurants. But we also have to realize that folks have lived in these communities for years And how are we providing, some sort of consideration to bring them up to speed, to bring them up to a sense of wholeness as well. And it's that lens that would, when I believe if we employ this sort of equity-centered design in all of our actions, whether that's in, environmental concerns or environmental issues, whether that's in education, whether that's in, collective economics, we'll get there. And that's this new sort of, paradigm that I think, this convergence of both this social change movement and also this pandemic are allowing us to see in a new light.
Thing that I love to ask everyone that I have the convo with is about leadership lessons that have helped them survive and thrive during this time. We're dealing with a lot. All of the things that you mentioned, as well as, we're in the midst of a pandemic. I know people are tired of talking about it. I'm tired of talking about it, but it is the reality of where we're at. So as we wrap up, if you could just share with me maybe one or two of those lessons.
And not to be, hokey about it at all. There's a quote by Senator Robert Kennedy. And of course, I'm with the Kennedy King Memorial Initiative, but Robert Kennedy said, it's not enough to simply understand or to see clearly. The future is shaped in the arena of human activity by those willing to commit their minds and their bodies to the task. And I say this, following my earlier statement saying that the empathy that we've seen right now has been unmatched and unprecedented and is to be commended. Even at 17th and Broadway, where my offices are, I've received calls from Boone County, Hendricks County, Hamilton County, folks saying, what can I do to get involved? But I think this is one of these times where the vulnerability that we're all experiencing, that we're all feeling in some sort of way, we have to sit and make space and honor that and realize that that feeling can then inspire us to make a better future and a brighter tomorrow for our kids. I just welcomed a daughter into the world 11 days ago. Everything that I'm doing, thank you. Everything that I'm doing now is for the world that my 2-year-old son and my 11-day-old daughter are going to inherit in the years to come. When we sort of, realize that vulnerability is what is motivating us and what's driving us, that sort of thorn in our side, what keeps you up at night is where you are supposed to address, and because that's an area of your passion. That's an area where you're going to truly be able to make a difference. You're going to be able to enhance the impact. You're going to be able to strengthen communities, because that is tied to how we are going to collectively advance and strengthen Indianapolis. So it's really leaning into that vulnerability that we all feel right now. There are folks who have, been able to live in privilege all of their life. And, to them, I say, hey, more power to you. The best, I hope, is still yet to come. But this time right now, when, COVID-19 is no respecter of persons, no respecter of income, no respecter of, socioeconomics. And yes, it is skewed to those who, find themselves under the unfortunate, short end of the stick when you're talking about the social determinants of health. Yes, but, folks in high, affluent communities are just as susceptible to this pandemic as those in lower income communities of this city. When you realize that what brings us together is greater than what separates us or divides us, the challenges that we collectively face and we can collectively overcome, you realize that we need each other and we need to continue to reach out to one another. I love the Landmark for Peace Memorial because you see Senator Robert Kennedy reaching out to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And to me, that is what Indianapolis can be, the best of what Indianapolis can be.
Wow. Well, what a great way to wrap up our conversation, Darryl. I just want to say thank you again for your time, for your thoughts, and all of the amazing work that you and your team at KKMI are doing in the community. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes. So thank you for, creating this platform, this space, and, definitely hope to engage with your network and everyone that you touch in the future.
Absolutely. And thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in to this week's Convo. Have a great day and a positive week.